Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, so let's get started.
Welcome back. And this episode, I will share some very effective tools to help you support your toddler moving from the single word level to phrases. And moving across this continuum here from single words to phrases requires very specific building blocks. And I refer to them as secrets, as they are really what a very good speech therapist would do. But the trick is we weren't actually taught these specific techniques or tools or secrets. So it's sort of through a lot of trial and error, a lot of analysis among us therapists, and we began to connect the dots through some deep dives into research and what happens in neurotypical or average speech and language development, how the human in any language, whether it's English or French or German or Chinese, it's all similar. And what I am going to lay out here for you is you can do it too. You can support your child because it's not really rocket science. There's nothing really special. And I've always said this about my private practice. There isn't anything special. I just know the subtle nuances and I shape that when I'm engaging and playing with your little one. So let's step back and take a look at what research tells us, that toddlers with typically developing language will acquire, and this is like a long phrase, so listen and I will break it down. They'll acquire single word spontaneous vocabulary list of at least 35 to 50 words before they're ready or able to combine words into two-word phrases. And what that means is they need a pool of at least 35 words that they can then use on a regular, automatic, spontaneous way to then practice longer and longer sentences, starting from phrases to complex conversations. What I will share with you today is the things that you can do, mom, dad, and grandma, at home to help support these prerequisite skills and connect the dots, literally and figuratively, of how to move your child down this developmental path. It's important that we understand that these have to be solidified. These have to be mastered in order to step into the arena of using two-word phrases on a regular basis. There's a list of 10. Let's break it down together. I'll give you action steps to take, and then you can implement and be the navigator that your child wants and needs and deserves. So the first one would be before you begin working on two-word combinations. And let me kind of share this caveat. A lot of these things your typical speech therapist is not aware of, because unfortunately these aren't things that were delineated or expressed specifically to us in graduate school. We had to kind of hone our skills and figure it out in real time, right? So keep that in mind, because you can share this information or this particular episode if you are in speech therapy and you see that your speech therapist perhaps is not understanding where to start and then how to support that onto the next level. So before anybody can begin working on two-word combinations, we have to make sure that any toddler, your toddler, their toddler, right, is saying at least 35 words on their own. That's what spontaneous means. It's not through rote or imitation tasks. That means that you notice them using these 35 or more words in everyday routines, that they are really beginning to express themselves verbally, right? So this point is very, very important. And a lot of speech pathologists miss this because they'll look at the chronological age and say they'll look at a 2-year-old. He only has 10, 12, 15 words, 20 words even. And they'll say, okay, let's do imitation, right? And they'll pick up, say truck, say wheel, say wheel. And they're not ready to do that, right? And so we have to help them build on what it would be a natural progression. And so you will catch me repeating, go back, look at his spontaneous word list and work off of that level. And the reason behind this is that toddlers need a large enough pool, a repertoire to pull words from in a very spontaneous, in a very automatic level. And in my experience, many late talkers, especially those with motor planning issues, have a single word vocabulary of well over 50 words before they consistently imitate 2-word phrases. And so that's really important to differentiate how they imitate 2-word phrases versus creating novel ones that they come up with themselves. And so the way that the brain is wiring itself for speech and language, we have to keep in mind that there's a difference between spontaneous, that means that it's emerging or that they've mastered that skill, versus imitation. And imitation quite often can be much harder because they have to look at you and listen to you, attend to you, and then on purpose direct their motor skills to say what you're saying. And that's a harder task. You can think of like learning a dance step, right? You can get on the floor and you can kind of ad lib and be okay, right? Maybe you have a decent rhythm in your head and you can swing your hips or tap your feet. But to follow somebody else's very specific dance steps in sequence, in timing, that's a whole different ballgame. So keep that in mind when you're trying to have your child imitate you, right? It's just like dancing, but even harder because the muscles are smaller, right? So if your toddler's vocabulary is not yet 35 to 50 words, 35 is minimum. And I know if you look at the milestones, we say, oh yeah, a 2-year-old needs 50 words by their 2nd birthday. And that is the minimum, right? And so the average child will have well close to 200 words. So if your child's not there yet, that's okay. That's where you start. You keep your focus then on helping them build single words. And every time I share these episodes and these underlying nuances as well as specific tips and tricks, it's all about meeting them where they are, right? So some children can imitate phrases before they truly have that 50 words on their own. There's a little delineation there, and I'll explain it. So they're looking at a phrase that you and I would identify as a whole word. So they have coded or mapped that phrase as a single unit. It might be a longer or a multisyllabic word. And an example would be, I'll be right back, or see you later, or 2 more minutes. Those are phrases that they hear over and over and over again. And they've coded it inside their head, inside their auditory verbal cortex area as a single word. And so they don't yet recognize where one word ends, see, and the next word begins, you later, right? They don't understand that that's 3 words, right? See you later. And I actually had a little guy, he was close to 3. And whenever he would see me or greet me or leave or thank me, he'd all say, hey, lady. And that, I didn't really have a real name. I was just, hey, lady. And that was like, come over here. Look what I'm doing. Hey, lady, right? Or you're playing quite often with a 12, 14, 16-month-old and you say, where'd it go? To them, where'd it go? That's a whole unit. And that's very typical when a child is just beginning to break through to verbal talking themselves. And it will happen a lot in the beginning. But the flip side to this, to slightly older kids, that 2, 2.5, 3-year-old, that usually suggests to me that there's an auditory processing difficulty, that they're not understanding how the parts fit together as the whole. So by 2, they should have a pool of 50 words, minimum of 35, just to move them to the next level. But if they don't, then they're having more difficulty understanding how the parts fit together. When I say red truck or get your boots, that they have to be able to auditorily perceive, interpret, that's what that means, and then break it down, right? And so when a child will hear longer chunks and use longer chunks, then that's a different processing. And there is a subgroup of kids, we refer to it as Gestalt language processing, and there's a lot of dialogue in the last, 5-10 years. It's something that we have studied. I've always interpreted it as a very different way to process language, to decode and understand that they speak in these big chunks. And yes, quite often there are kids who end up falling on the autism spectrum. And so if you study that group, then you'll see about 75 to 80% of kids on the autism spectrum will present with a Gestalt processing style. And Gestalt, what that means. It's just the whole thing. And that's that scripted language or learning in chunks. And so over time, the vast majority of them will process or decode language down into the individual words, but they're not following the typical or average hierarchy, right? And so that's a different episode, but I want to compare that there is a subgroup of those kids with the Gestalt language processing system, but the vast majority of kids will do that in the very beginning with common phrases that I just shared, like see you later or 2 more minutes. And so that's normal, part of the new acquisition, right? The acquirement of more language. Quite often parents, when they give me a word list, they'll say all done. But the child has coded it as all done or no more, or thank you. Or they'll even say things like, I love you. But that's the whole intonation pattern. And it's great. They understand what it means. I love you. I love you. But they don't know I love you are 3 different words with different meanings, right? They follow the melody and they've mapped it as a unit. That's okay in the beginning. But if a child is doing that only, then that's a different profile. So the best way to know if your child's vocabulary is at this level, and I think you probably have figured this out, we need 35 to 50 words, is to make a list. And that's something that you can do today and you can work on over the next week. Identify the words that he says on his own, not imitatively, right? What is the pool? What's his repertoire today or over the next 2 or 3 days, right? And it's all about what he says on his own. Where is he with this expressive language? I always had parents do this, and some parents were better at it than others, but it's really, really a vital piece of data that you can say, okay, some people might be sitting here listening or watching and saying, I wonder where my child is developmentally. And you can do this by keeping a piece of paper on the kitchen counter or on the fridge or in your back pocket. And I always suggest to parents to do it on a scrap piece of paper or something that you can just always have with you, that you can just jot it down really quickly in the moment. And that if you try to pull out your cell phone and that's too cumbersome, it interrupts the flow. And if he's in a talking mood or if he's really kind of engaged, then you want to be able to scribble that on a piece of paper and do it subtly and not interfere, right? And the truth is some parents, a lot of parents, are very surprised with the results and that they truly kind of have underestimated where their child's vocabulary list is. And they're excited and say, wow, he has 45 words. And the key is, part of this list making is that approximations are true words. And so you have to use those too. And sometimes they can use an approximation for two things. And we can talk about that later. But an approximation would be if a child said yo-yo for yellow, yo-yo, yo-yo, right? Or unky, unky for monkey, right? They're dropping off a lot of the initial sounds and the final sounds. But they consistently use that when they play with their favorite monkey or when their truck is yellow, right? And they go, yo-yo, yo-yo. Or they could say an approximation of ooey, ooey if something's gooey, right? So they can't get the g back there. But those are true words. They're just approximated, right? And we have to then help them with some of the speech, and we can talk about that, but not at this developmental level. It's all about where your child is developmentally. You meet them where they are, and then we help them get to the next level. And the key is when you sit down with that little scrap piece of paper in your pocket, it's your time to play the detective, right? Listen. And here's a key. I don't want you, typing out or thumbing out the word list on your phone, but you can turn it on record and secretly set it on the other side of the table and without his permission, record, right? If you're playing at the coffee table, if you're sitting with him at the high chair, or you're engaged on the floor, you can just set it there face down. He won't notice it, right? And secretly record. And then you can go back and really, really listen. And if you listen with earbuds, then you can get some of those subtle nuances. Is he saying the g sound? Is he saying the sound? And that's what I do when someone sends me a videotape or an audio tape. I put my earbuds on, close my eyes, and really, really listen. You can do this too. It's really very important piece of data that you can have. So the flip side to that is some parents are disappointed and they realize, holy cow, it's a short list. It's 12 words that he uses over and over and over again. And they're very approximated. Again, meet him where he is, because we don't want to jump 3 steps ahead. That's not going to serve him, right? So if you're not sure how your child is doing, I definitely recommend that you make a list, and you can start tomorrow morning, right? And try to extrapolate that list when, he's engaged and happy and himself, natural situations, right? I think it would be important if parents did that at 12 months and 18 months and 24 months and 30 months and really, really watched their language unfold, blossom, right? It's good data to see the progress, and it's really, really important. So that's the first secret, right? How many words does he have that he uses on his own? So number 2 would be that your child needs to have a variety of words in that vocabulary list of different grammatical categories. And that's the important part. And we'll talk about what those grammatical categories are. So keep in mind that he needs or she needs this before he can sensibly combine words. And so you're like, well, what the heck does that mean? You can look at his vocabulary list and you can analyze, are most of those words nouns, right? Names of things or names of people. And if that is, then he can't really combine words. I mean, that's not how we talk, right? We use nouns and then we combine different types of grammatical structures with them. We can use it sometimes, like we can say daddy's coat, right? Daddy coat, or Joey's boot or mommy car, right? Those we can put two nouns together, but that's very limited if you want to be conversational or communicative. I guess as I'm thinking about, I'm going to delineate what these grammatical structures are. If you want this in a list, I can certainly do that for all of you. Maybe you can shoot me a DM or send me a response down below and let me know, and I'll make that as a PDF for you all. But there are actually 7 different grammatical categories that kids need to start to gather in their list of 35, 50, 100 words, right? So the nouns is one of them, but they also need social words, right? They need to say bye-bye or hi or hello, again, approximated. So they need some social words. They need requesting words, and that would be please, more, again, those to make requests. They also need verbs, and I talk a lot about targeting verbs because verbs are very powerful, and kids like that because people take action. That's what a verb is, right? Go, eat, sleep, drink, jump, open, push, right? Stop. So those are verbs, and that's very, very powerful. And of course, nouns and verbs go together, so you can readily put two words together for a concept, right? And then they also need early pronouns, such as me, mine, and my. Those all, himself or herself, right? I, me, mine, my, I, and then you, like you do it, right? They'll also need prepositions or location. And this is where we can play with opposites, right? In, put it in the bucket, right? Take it out. You take it off or put it on, right? You take your coat off, put your coat on. You go up or down or here, to the doggy, here, doggy, or go there, right? So those words they need in their list of 35 to 50 to 100. And then they also need some negation. We all know that, the twos and saying no, I don't want to. No. But as they approach that second birthday and beyond, they'll also use contractions like don't, right? They don't say do not. They say don't or can't, because you and I contract those words. And then we'll also need to see, do they have adjectives or adverbs, right? Those are those description words. Big, hot, fast, yucky. If they ate a new dish or something and they say, ooh, yucky food, or hot soup. So you want them combining different grammatical structure. And that's important. If they have 30 words or 35 words, but they're all nouns, except for no, maybe, right? If they don't have them, when you take that analysis of their word list, then that's where you start. They need different categories, so then they have a broad vocabulary base, and then they can build those phrases. So how many words do they have? And is it across different grammatical categories? So think of that. The third one would be that your child needs to be able to sequence 2 syllables together. And again, when you take his word list, that you're going to analyze that. If he routinely reduces a multiple or a multisyllabic word down to 1 syllable, then we know that there's a motor planning issue. What that means is we're not asking him to say supercalifragilistic. We're saying he reduces mama to ma, or bubble to ba. Every time he wants a ba, right? I used to have bubbles here. Oh, ba. Or monkey would be ki or ma, right? They reduce it to one syllable. Or instead of even saying wa, or water, right? They would reduce it to wa, right? And so if you see 80% of their words are reduced to one syllable, then that's where we start. That he needs more practice with sequencing syllables first before we can try to teach him or support that development of learning phrases. So we can't put two words together if they're omitting most of a two-syllable word. So you can work on this by practicing words with what we speech therapists call reduplication, or they're just repetitive patterns, because that's the easiest and the earliest form that most kids do this. And they'll do that in their babbling phase, right? At 8 and 10 and 12 months. That very typical language development has shown us that that's what kids do, that they'll reduplicate or they'll double up those patterns. And we've looked at thousands and thousands and thousands of kids over the last 80 years. We know what the average progress looks like. An early example of this would be, say you look and your son or daughter has 10, 12, 15, 20 words, and they're mostly one syllable word, right? And so now what you're going to do is give them opportunities to hear and practice those two syllable reduplicated words like mama, dada. That's why they say that. They don't really know that you're the mama or the dada. I always tell this to my families, but it's just because that's the easiest form to make in our mouth, right? Or they'll say bye-bye, or even baba for bottle, wah-wah for water, night-night, right? And, the true form of like good night, that's too hard. Too many sounds, too much movement in the mouth, right? Water, that R at the end, that's tricky oral motor planning. And yes, we're simplifying it, and I'm not advocating baby talk. No, never, ever. But what you're doing is meeting them and helping them practice. It's like a physical workout. You go to the gym. You don't want to do that so you can lift, a 10, 20, 30 pound dumbbell. No, you want to be able to carry your toddler or take the groceries up the stairs. You do that as a physical workout. So then real life activities are easier. And that's what you're doing here too. When you support and show them that they can practice by putting two syllables together. They're the same syllable because that's easier before you say good night. You can say night, night. And it's warming up the engine, right? And he's getting the planning of these oral articulators to work, right? Try to target these words with sounds that he already has. Say he has a lot of words. And so you try to really target some of those words and look at his list, keep it close by, and play around with where is he? What sounds is he? I say he a lot, but he or she's making, and then how can we build from that? And one of the best, and I've done this for, as I said, 35 years, but one of the best track to use are animal sounds. And a lot of parents don't really get the nuances, the critical piece to playing around with animal sounds. They think it's just fun and, oh yeah. No, it really helps with that motor planning. And at this stage, if they have a shortened syllable and we want to double it up, then we say moo, moo, or ba, ba, nay, nay, right? Two of the same back to back. Quack, quack, woof, woof. All of those great animal sounds. And then If you want to put another layer to it and make it really, really therapeutic or learning based, right? Then do some kind of movement. You can clap, you can pat on the floor, because we can feel, right? You use gross motor and fine motor. And I know that in a recent episode, I think it was episode 66, I talk a lot about motor planning, gross motor planning, and speech coming together through nursery rhymes, right? So when you're doing these animal sounds, you clap or snap or pound on the table or stomp your feet, moo, moo, oink, 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 oink. All of those funny sounds and movement go together, right? And that's part of how the brain is wiring itself, going from those gross motor to those fine motor skills and planning it out on purpose. So you can model these funny, cute little animal duplicated sounds and then wait. And if he doesn't do it, then help him. Do hand over hand, assist him through the process so he can feel. And you don't have to, force him to say it, but he can clack or go quack, quack, or stomp, stomp. He can feel the planning, the motor planning and the speech combining together. So this technique, working through two of the same syllables through some gross motor planning, really can help even a child who has motor planning problems. We call it apraxia of speech, but they don't have to. They can just have low tone or just hasn't had a lot of workout through chewing or eating or just babble. And so he is weak in coordinating these, and not all it takes, but the vast majority of it to kick it and move it on down is to play with these animal sounds. And that's one of the reasons why signing is so effective with kids who are struggling. It's helpful and it's cute and it's fun if they're on a neurotypical path. But if there's any kind of delay or you're concerned, then signing helps support that. It also takes the pressure off of these fine motor movements, and we're doing these gross motor movements that are more fun. So keep that in mind. I just want to step in and kind of change gears because I realize that's a lot of nuance and it's a lot of really valuable information that I don't want you to overlook. I want you to be able to implement it and start gathering information and work from home with confidence. You now know how to create a word list secretly over 2 or 3 days in a variety of contexts. Home is where your toddler, your most beautiful child, is most comfortable. Home with you playing, engaging through his daily routines. And that's where he's going to be his most authentic self. Yes, it's true. Us speech pathologists, we take speech and language samples too, but it's done over several sessions and you are paying the bill, $150 a pop. But we have to do that over several sessions because it takes time to build a rapport and gain your toddler's trust to be himself. But you got this, right? You can do it at home right now with no extra cost. Get the word list, analyze the vocabulary. Does he or she have different grammatical categories? Are they just nouns? Where are the verbs, adjectives, prepositions? Do they use social gestures or social words? Are they requesting? We ran through the list. And if he's not, then you know exactly where to start. You know how to spend your time now with him during his casual routines, his day-to-day life. You know, let's add more verbs. Let's build his whole vocabulary list because he only has 15 words that he uses over and over and over again. Or you could say, okay, he has 75, 100 words. Great. He's using some of the different grammatical structures. Great. But he's not really using 2 syllables. So let's start there. Let's start playing with animal sounds. The truth is, it's not hard per se. It's just a really novel concept that most of you have never ever thought of. Rightfully so. I'm sure you're great at whatever profession you've been trained at. So now I'm giving you the tools. You know the exact first step that any qualified, good, decent speech pathologist would do. Now, I just taught you how to do it. You can do it from home where he's comfortable and authentic, and you can do it across every single day, right? That's your assignment. No matter where you and your toddler are on this journey, word list, analyze, find the starting point. Now, some of you might say, well, he has 200 words. He's putting words together. It's just not in a regular fashion. Great. Then you have gathered his word list, you've analyzed it, and you've confirmed these 3 steps are done. Great, let's move on. Guess what? I'm going to give you those next steps as well. But I didn't want to overload everyone. Remember, take advantage of these particular days because it's during the holidays. And what do? We have a lot of Christmas carols. They're repetitive. They're cute. They're easy. We can do gestures to them. Think, we wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. Trust me, toddlers, preschoolers love it. So make gestures with them, do a little dance routine, get the bodies moving, and the fine motor speech will be integrated with it. I promise you. Don't forget to subscribe and look out for some bonus episodes because a lot's happening and I don't want you to miss any of it. You guys have got this. You have your homework assignment for this week, and those that have already checked that off, great. I've got you covered too. Remember, eat, talk, play every single day. God bless, and I'll see you next week. Bye.